talk about them all the time to them. And one of the reasons for that is that in my experience delivering blueprints for our customers, I've seen it become a very effective tool for setting up business intelligence and analytics projects for success. So I'm looking forward to sharing our methodology with you today and finding out how you can apply it as well. I'd also like to introduce Matt Dwyer. He's the VP of Product Management for Fran Connect, and he's graciously donating his time today to help share with us how Fran Connect applied the blueprint to great effect with development of analytics inside their product. So first off, what is the blueprint? You can think of it as a comprehensive product roadmap for a data initiative that you're launching. So in that, it gives you the definition of your solution, also how to get there, and what that's going to take you in terms of time and resources. Why do you want a roadmap? Can I get a show of hands? How many of you have seen a great idea go down in flames because there wasn't a good plan to start with? That's kind of what I expected. We've all been there. So with that in mind, the blueprint gives you that plan, but it gives you a plan targeted especially at BI solutions. So for solutions that require data delivery for the right insights to the right people. Where might you apply a blueprint? Most often our customers come to us when they are starting a push to become a data-driven organization and they need a vision for enterprise BI. Also when they are introducing analytics into a current product offering and they want to know how they do that and what that's going to look like for their customers. Also when they're trying to determine what the next generation of business intelligence looks like in their organization. Maybe they already have a successful product and they want to know where might we take this? Might we introduce self-service? Might we introduce a predictive capability? And lastly, when they're redesigning an offering that may have limitations or may have poor performance, and they want to understand how to fix those problems the right way. With those in mind, I'd like to bring in Matt to tell us what prompted Fran Connect to take the blueprint approach.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So for anybody who's unfamiliar with Fran Connect, we're a SaaS provider of technology solutions in the franchising space. So we work with some of the largest franchise brands, such as the UPS Store and 7-Eleven, Hardee's, Carl's Jr., a lot of brands that you would know. And they use our technology to run their franchising business, maintaining the relationship with their franchisees. We have a very wide offering, everything from sales CRM, financial reporting tools, local marketing tools, legal compliance tools. So it's a very wide offering. And we had a new CEO come on board about 1.5 years ago. And in his first 90 days in visiting with a lot of our customers, he came back and said to me, Matt, the number one thing that I'm hearing from our customers is that we have got to have business intelligence inside of our product. And so we went about selecting a vendor, ultimately choosing Logi, and we knew that we had a very fast track that we wanted to put the product through because we had a hard deadline of an industry convention that was going to be coming up where we wanted to be able to show off a prototype and then to kind of reset after that to actually launch the product and build out something that was a little bit more fully featured. And so we went actually, when we talked to Logi, we said right up front, we're going to need professional services as part of this because we know that we need help to do this as quickly as possible. And they suggested this two-phase approach where we would first work with a quick start package to get to a prototyping stage. And then after that, kind of reset and say, okay, now that we've got some experience, our developers have had their hands on the tool for a few months and are starting to become experts and have a lot more ideas and questions. And we've started to socialize what we're working on with our marketplace. How can we take this and turn it into a fully realized offering? And so the nature of the blueprint for us was to use all of the knowledge that we had gained up to that point and work with Jason Murray at Logi Analytics to actually then define, okay, who are our user personas? What are the user stories that we want to have? Let's put those out into a roadmap. Let's fine-tune our technology stack and make sure that our performance is set up correctly up front. And so we really were trying to get everything into a package where we could have a product at launch, which we're actually launching right now this month with our first beta users. And I feel like because we went through the blueprint process, we're able to launch a more fully realized product than we would have if we had just been kind of, trying to figure it out on our own.
Thanks, Matt. So given the aggressive timeline, as Matt mentioned, they were given a very short time frame in which to get this product off the ground. How might we give Matt a plan to get that done so that he can start developing as soon as possible? Ultimately, our blueprint boils down to 3 steps. You want to find and talk to the right people, by which I mean in your interviews, in getting to understand why there's a need for a problem, or why there's a need for a solution. You want to go find your audience. Who's ultimately going to be using this? Don't just talk to folks who are your internal sponsors and also your technical expertise. Next, you want to find out from your audience, how are they using data today to do their jobs, or how do they need to be using data in order to improve their area of the business? And lastly, you compile all that information and draw out the points of your roadmap, and you connect the dots. I just made that sound easy. I'll walk you through each of these steps now to explain in more depth how you get there. First off, talking to the right people. And I can't emphasize this enough, included in that audience need to be your users. These are the people who actually have the problem that you're trying to solve. And most importantly, if you don't talk to them, you risk building them something that isn't relevant, and you won't see user adoption. I do get often, people will tell me, you don't need to talk to the users, they really don't know what they want. I actually have never found that to be true. I have found that if I don't talk to those folks, I don't design something that fits their need. Also, I find that the kinds of questions you ask them draw out their vision, and then it's a matter of translating it, and I'll walk you through that in step 2. If you don't know who your audience is, you know you have a problem, but that's all right now. You hear that, okay, we don't know how many sales we're making. That's all I know. How do you define your audience? You want to ask who needs this? Okay, so who needs that sales information? Why do they need it? What are they going to be able to do once they have that? And lastly, how urgent is the need? I ask this because, let's take our enterprise BI initiative as an example. Maybe there are 9 departments in a company that need to come online to this solution ultimately, but the problem is urgent for 2 or 3 of them. Those are the ones where you're going to want to interview people. Maybe the others can be tabled for future phases. Once you've identified your audience, you want to break those down into personas. Could I get a show of hands? How many of you are familiar with the term persona? Okay, so for those of you who aren't, effectively a persona is a collection of common actions and activities that a percentage of your users might need to take out of your solution. So you want to find those personas in your audience. Maybe you have 2 or 3 in a sales team, for example, that might be using a solution to understand how they're performing. You might have your sales manager, your sales operations team, and your account execs. Those might be your 3 personas because they each have distinct needs out of your solution. Some other things to consider, distinct teams or groups of users. Maybe your persona is that sales team, and you also have a finance team, and you also have an operations team. All of those folks are going to need to act. Maybe they are groups of users in the sense that you have customers who are manufacturers, and they have different teams by production line in their plants that are going to need to use the data differently. Then there's unique roles, such as that sales team hierarchy I just explained. Very often, these will be your personas by default. I find that when we're delivering blueprints, especially for internal use cases, but also for cases such as Matt's delivering to Fran Connect, you might find that your customer roles map to distinct needs out of your solution. Also consider types of use. Do you have folks in your organization or in your customer base today who are accustomed to downloading their own data and playing with it and getting the analysis that they need? Are they going to be your power users? Or maybe your audience is entirely comprised of people who needs to come to a dashboard, see something's off, and go take an action on it. Once you identify those personas, okay, you've lined up people in the know in your user group, your user base, whom you need to talk to. Your other stakeholders, and this should be fairly straightforward for most of us. Obviously, you're going to want to talk to your technical subject matter experts. This is anybody with knowledge of the data systems in use and where they live today. Also, your IT teams, anybody who supports where those solutions will live or where your product will live. Also, anybody in terms of development teams and operations who are going to help you launch that solution. Also, your business subject matter experts. These may not be people who will actively be using your solution, but they have deep knowledge of an area of the business that will benefit from it. You want to validate your assumptions with them and also have them guide you throughout development. And lastly, project sponsors. I don't just mean official in the project management sense, but anybody who's going to be contributing resources to your project. This is not just for project management, but also because they might have great input as to who else you should talk to. So now you've lined up people from your user personas, also everyone else who's a stakeholder in your project. Next stage, you're going to interview them. We usually do this in delivering a blueprint in about 2 to 3 days on-site working with our customers. It's a bit of a grueling process, but it actually is effective in that we're usually getting everybody we need together for those 2 to 3 days. It means ideas bounce off more readily. But 2 to 3 days, and we line up those interviews in a specific order. Namely, we kick it off with a discussion with the project sponsors on the problem that we're coming in to solve. And any constraints and key goals around that. Next are the user interviews. We do this first because you want that information when you go into your technical discussions. Here are the systems we learned about. Here are the workflows that aren't working. Can you tell me where these things live and how they connect? And then your technical interviews where you go through those discussions. And finally, we usually present our initial findings on the end of the second or third day, and then take that information and boil it down into a document deliverable. So that's how to line everybody up. Now, what do those user interviews look like? There'll be a slightly different format to discussions with your technical representatives and so on. So I'll walk you through how we do that process now. First of all, in getting to know your audience, you're ultimately looking for how it is they use information in their day-to-day job, or how they're not able to use information today, which may be the problem you're solving for them. You want to find out what systems they use, how those systems interact, and you want to keep your language as broad as possible. You want to avoid technical terms. You might be talking to people in all kinds of different areas of business, especially if your customer base is across industries or across verticals. So here are some starter questions that we like to use. These will often open up answers that let you dive down into more detail. But to begin with, I always ask people, okay, can you describe your role to me? Tell me what you do here. What does an average hour or day or week in the life look like for you? Who do you interact with, and what do they bug you for in a day, and what do you have to bug them for? And when you're going for that information, what do you use? What databases do you log into? What systems might even be spreadsheets or paper still today? What metrics do you need? How do you measure not only performance of your part of the business, what you do for a living, but how is your performance measured, if it's relevant? And lastly, what are some challenges or frustrations in your current job? Now, that question can open you up to more information than you might have wanted, but you can also get great info out of it, such as, well, I keep being bugged for our latest customer list, and I can't get to it because it's in a system that doesn't load. Along with just asking the questions, you want to keep some things in mind to get really good information out of those interviews. You're working with folks, you may only have 1 to 2 hours with people from each of those personas. So there are some tips you want to follow to make sure your answers have a lot of information in them, and you don't lead to conclusions earlier than you'd like. First of all, keep an open mind. Another show of hands, how many of us are product or solutions professionals in the room today? So a fair number of us. We're used to walking into a room having some sense of the solution we'd like to deliver. If we do that with user interviews, we sometimes go in with a preconceived notion. You might miss critical details or even a change in course because you're subconsciously screening out some answers from your users. So with that in mind, go in expecting the unexpected. Next, ask open-ended questions. You'll notice in the list that I just showed you, all of those were open-ended. You want to avoid yes and no answers. Give your users an opening to tell you whatever they like that may be relevant to the problem that you're trying to solve. And lastly, I recommend limiting your interviews with your user audience to small focused groups, 2 or 3 people. Have a separate interview with each persona group. When you throw everybody together, you don't get great information out of it. You can muddy the waters somewhat. Once you've completed those interviews, and you want to take notes, which is something I should have said earlier. You want to be taking notes, you want to record if you're lazy like me and you don't take notes very well, so that you can review all of that information out of your user interviews before you go into discussions with your technical folks, and pull out the gold from that information. You're looking for what are the metrics that they're interested in or that they need to use in a day, what databases, what systems do they interact with on a daily basis, what teams, what do they like today? That's an important one because you probably don't want to disrupt that in your solution design. And also, what obstacles are they facing in getting access to data in their current solution? Once you've boiled all that information down and pulled out those points, you'll find that you have the information you need to detail the components of your BI solution and then pull together an architecture out of that. Starting with data, you've reviewed databases, anywhere your users currently get information. That might be relational stores, it might be paper off a clipboard. I have a customer who's currently trying to fight to free their users from a paper habit. Anywhere they currently get information, you want to have a list of that you can take if you don't already know where these things live, to go find out where they live and whether or not it'll be possible to pull that information in. Next is UI. This is critical to user adoption. In a BI context, this will mean, okay, are we presenting this as a dashboard? Are we presenting these as gauges or charts or tables? What does the data presentation look like for best effect? Security. So another thing you want to ask in your user interviews, what can you see today? What are you not allowed to see? You want to verify that logic, obviously, with your business sponsors, with your technical experts, but that gives you an understanding of who will be allowed to enter your solution and what they'll be allowed to see in it. Integration, so maybe the users are accustomed to entering a portal first for all their other business applications. You'll need to integrate your analytics solution with that. Maybe they use a special security framework, and you'll have to account for that as well. So any systems that may not be data systems that will have to be integrated. And lastly, infrastructure. Where does all of this live today? Are you going to need to set up new infrastructure for the solution? Not talking about detailed capacity planning here, that's probably not practical, but at least laying the groundwork for it. From there, very often in our Blueprint on-site discovery sessions, we'll actually start drawing this up now for our technical discussions. So here are the databases that we understood. Here's the application it feeds into. It's going to be embedded in a portal application. It has to go through this security framework. Here's how I heard all of this fitting together. Does this make sense? And to your technical architects and experts, does it make sense or am I crazy? And then you can refine this during that whiteboard session and determine and get the initial high-level picture of what this will look like. Something else I recommend mocking up is UI. This is a fairly recent addition to our blueprints. This is getting in front of users on a whiteboard and drawing up what you think you're hearing from them. I don't recommend doing this early in the interview. You'd rather your users guide you than vice versa. Even if they can't tell you how they want the solution to look, because they're not familiar with what dashboards or analytics applications are supposed to show them, they very often have an idea in mind that you can draw out through those interview questions. So once that picture starts developing, I recommend drawing it up, just the conceptual form of it, and getting sign-off. Okay, here's what I heard. You want to be able to see these gauges. You want to interact with the map this way. Does this make sense to you? I also recommend, along with keeping it simple, that you iterate through this. So maybe after your user interviews, you draw this up in a more formal sense. This mock-up is from a tool called Balsamic. I've used that in PowerPoint for mock-ups. And then you share that with your user groups, your technical groups, and so on, to share that vision and get everybody on the same page. Switching back to Matt, wanted to ask, what was the solution for Fran Connect as defined by the blueprint?
Yeah, so as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it kind of came down to a lot of the components that you described before. And one of the key challenges that we had is we had a very good sense of who our user personas were. We have very good relationships with our customers. We're very deeply integrated. And so we really had an understanding of what we had to do from a persona and delivery perspective. But what we didn't necessarily know was what actual data visualizations are needed? What components of the data do people want to interact with? Which was surprising to us, and I would tell everybody in the room, if you get to that point and you're talking to your users and they're not giving you great feedback, don't get frustrated and don't be surprised, because we have a user community that is not shy about telling us what they would like to see in our product and new features that they'd like to have added. But when I went out to a lot of them and asked, what would you like to see in your data? What types of questions are you trying to answer that you can't answer today? I got a lot of blank stares. And people kind of said, well, I don't know. I don't know what the questions are. I just know that I need business intelligence. I know that I need to work with my data much better. And so part of our blueprint was actually for us to look at our own data and kind of based on the personas, try to make some suggestions about what are the things that people would want to see. So that was a key component of it. The technical architecture was a very important part because we had a lot of decisions to make about how to actually set up our stack with Logi. Without getting into too much detail, we have kind of a very unique multi-tenant setup. And so we had to figure that out. And we also needed to figure out a roadmap for the features that we wanted to add, not just in a V1, but over the first maybe 18 months of the life of the product. And so that kind of became the core document that we walked away from with the blueprint. It really was a blueprint of these are the personas that we're going to cater to. These are the user stories that we want to provide through our product. Here's roughly when we think we can get those in place based on the level of effort and the technical challenges that we might run into. And kind of walked away with a plan that we're still running through today in terms of the launch of the product.
Thank you. So with all that, once you have that solution defined, next you've got to define the plan around that. How are we going to get this to launch? What does that look like for us? So this is connecting the dots. What are the dots? So those are the points you're drawing a route, effectively, from where you are now, the concept of your solution, to through development to launch. All of those points have actually come out of the discussions we've already been over. So from your project sponsor discussions, from talking to your users, from reviewing all of that with your technical experts, you should have the key problems, whatever is driving this whole effort to start with. The key goals, what should the solution accomplish once it is launched? Also your target audience, by definition, you better have that tightly defined. You understand your personas and what they need specifically from the data. Also key functionality, so what for your users will make or break the solution? Do they need mobile functionality? They need to be able to view dashboards on tablets and so on. Something like that, that without that, the solution will not work. The solution design, we've reviewed drawing up the architecture and also the high level, each of those components inside your architecture. And lastly, the time frame. So you asked up front, how urgent is the need? But in talking to various user groups, you'll also get a sense for how urgent the need is for each of them. Talking to your business sponsors, obviously, you're going to find out what time frame you have to work in. And from your technical folks, okay, this is what's going to be possible within that time frame and what isn't. Once you've got those, there's a lot of project planning that's fairly generic. I'm going to walk you through what we often see in BI projects coming out of blueprints. First off, in a BI project, you may have significant work to do to develop a data tier that will support the kind of solution you're looking for. With that in mind, that introduces a couple of common challenges on our projects. So we recommend structuring your project in one of a couple of ways. If you have more time to develop, and you also have perhaps constrained resources, you can only get your data experts in at certain times and your development experts in at other times, then in that case, you might want to go for a milestone-based approach, where in a phase one, you deliver your data tier. In the next phase, you deliver your application. More often, we're seeing parallel efforts where you have a tightly controlled lineup of data tier alongside application. You can accomplish this in less time if that's one of your constraints, but it's also an all hands on deck. You're going to need not only your database architects and developers, you're going to need your dev team, you're going to need people to validate the data, your QA team fairly closely aligned and coordinated well. Another area to consider, so development schedules. As part of our blueprint delivery, we always define a schedule for our customers within the time frame constraints that they've introduced. Some things to consider here, I recommend that you keep a group of the folks that you interviewed out of your user personas as a kind of committee who can review design as you iterate on it, and also see results coming out at frequent intervals during development. That way you get feedback from them early and often. Also, you get them engaged. It's a great way to build user adoption because they see what's coming, they get excited about it, and they can be kind of the ambassadors to the rest of your user group. Another thing to consider, validate data early. Nobody likes doing this, but I've seen a lot of projects launch, not unsuccessfully, but with lower user adoption than certainly the sponsors would have liked, because the first thing the users see are the numbers that are off. So as much as possible, you want to find people who can participate in data validation efforts, get them signed on early as soon as you're feeding data into your application, have them checking numbers so that you can correct early and what you launch is accurate. With that in mind, some staffing considerations for BI projects. Obviously, you want a data team on hand, whether you outsource for that or you bring in, for example, we have DBCR on site this week. They're one of Logi's prime partners in this area. Or you have in-house folks who are your experts on your current data systems. You're also going to want that data validation team. These might be your business subject matter experts who understand that data and how it's being used to a great detail. Also consider UI and design resources, especially for cases such as with Fran Connect's product, where they were embedding analytics. Very often that introduces branding and UI considerations. You have customers who are already used to behaviors in your current offering. It can help to bring in UI and design resources to make sure that's streamlined in your final product. Okay, so what are some common risks that we see in our projects, and how do you mitigate them? First and foremost, it's usually no dashboard, nice dashboard, but no data. Don't let your application development effort get ahead of your data tier where possible. That's where that parallel effort can help, or building that data tier out first. Second, nobody signs on. So this is where having that user committee, checking in with them at frequent intervals, having them see and get hands-on with what you're building can help mitigate this risk. First of all, you find out if you're off base in any part of your design, and second, they get excited about it. This can sound like a nice problem to have, but it can also be kind of a headache. This is everybody signs on to your application, and they all have input, and they all have things that they want you to be doing differently. Another problem that we see develop in this case is that it's more than you were expecting, and you start hitting performance problems early. So in this circumstance, you want to be monitoring and tuning for performance frequently. Also, use the blueprint method to iterate for future phases. Maybe you're getting 20 enhancement requests a day from an excited user base. Give them a mechanism to log that, track those enhancements, go back and interview those users as to why they want that, design those into future phases using the blueprint method, and iterate. Finally, what does this process deliver for you? So in a blueprint today, when we deliver the final document to our customers, it includes a detailed analysis of the requirements, the initial business problem that's driving the BI solution, the goals of the project, so what insights is it supposed to deliver, also the target audience in fine detail. We also have the solution design, not only that architectural design, but any considerations around security, databases, those other components. And lastly, and this is what I find business sponsors generally consider the most important, is that implementation plan, and that's ultimately a software delivery plan. Here are the phases of your software delivery, who you need for them, and what that's going to take. So considering those things, I'd like to turn it back to Matt, not only to give us a demo of what Fran Connect provided, but also to ask you first, so what risks did the blueprint process mitigate for you, and what was the outcome of your solution?
I think the main risk that we probably mitigated was just time, because we probably would still be trying to figure out what types of data visualizations we want to have in the product. And you'll see when I go through the demo, this sort of gallery of data visualizations that are available to our users to drop on their dashboard is a key component of that, because a lot of our user personas are not very, technically advanced, and so they're not going to want to dig into their data and build their own visualizations and design their own dashboard. They want 2 or 3 clicks to get to the data that they want. And so I think that we would still probably be trying to figure out what some of those key visualizations were, as well as the best way to represent the data, because anytime we came up with a question, the Logi team was able to say, we think that this is the best way to represent that, or here's 2 or 3 ways to represent that. And it kind of gave us a lot of great ideas for how we're still building some of the visualizations. I would say the other key component that we got out of that was information about kind of launching, going to market. We got a lot of great support on helping price out our solution, which we were really kind of in the dark. And so some of the activities that we're going through now in terms of a launch plan, pricing, marketing, things like that are things that we are executing based on the knowledge that we got out of the blueprint.
Right.
Great.
And I'm turning it over to you to demo Fran Connect solution.
Okay, great. Let me bring up our system. I'm going to go home here. So you can. So just quickly, I won't go into the real in-depth demo because I think there's probably a lot of people that are very familiar with Logi Analytics in the room, and I think that when I get to a couple of places, you're going to say, hey, I recognize that. But for context, and in terms of what we got out of the blueprint and what we decided to put together, you can see I mentioned earlier all of the different applications that Fran Connect offers. They're shown across the top here. So we have our CRM, our project management tools, our legal compliance tools. And a couple of the key challenges that we were trying to solve, we of course have canned reporting in each of these applications. We have a light report writer in some of those, but not in all of them. And we didn't have any reporting that spanned across the entirety of the data that we have inside of the system. And so our customers can license from us one or up to the full suite out of our set of applications here. They can add things on at a later date. And so we also had to be mindful that there might be some brands that we're working with that are going to get a lot more value based on the wide footprint of Fran Connect applications that they're using. And so what we decided to do was to make a product where users who are not tech savvy could get into the system and begin to use it and to begin to see value from it from day one. And so we came up with this idea of a loading screen. This is what a user sees the first time they log into the application. And we essentially asked them, who are you? Are you involved in product development? Are you involved in finance, field operations, marketing, franchisee engagement? And that allows them, if we select one of these areas, this is essentially saying, which persona are you? We've already figured out your path from that persona in terms of what you would want to consume inside of the system. So tell us who you are, and we'll use that as a starting point. So I could choose my franchise development persona here, and that's going to come up with a set of visualizations that we've determined to be key. And I apologize, there's a lot of wonky data because this is, of course, our sandbox and people are doing all sorts of crazy stuff with it. So we come up with a set of visualizations from the start, and then the next step up from there, and I mean, obviously there's value from this from day one, right? So then we can say, okay, well, the step 2 for you, if you're slightly more advanced or you're a little bit more particular, is let's actually tweak the settings in here. Let's give you different filters. Let's allow you to personalize what your experience as a user is going to be. And of course, they could change the layout, go into free-form mode, drag this around if they start to get a little bit more advanced and want to get more particular. But the key for us in here is really the gallery of different visualizations. I mentioned we've got about 55 in here that we're going to market with. And one of the valuable pieces of the way that we set up the architecture was that if we have a customer come to us and say, it would be really neat if I could see this in the system, and maybe they're not really great with report writing or something, if we see value in that, we can build it, we can embed it into the application, and we can deploy that in a matter of 2 or 3 days, including QA, without having to touch the application code, without having to do a big refresh or update, no downtime or anything like that. And so this is actually a mechanism for us to speed up delivery of new components in the system as well. So we're encouraging people to start, identify their persona. use that as a starting point to tweak their dashboard, decide which visualizations they want to see, set their filters, change the layout on the screen. And then once they get to a point where they're comfortable, or if you've got people inside of the organization that are great with data science or data analysis to begin with, they can go straight into the self-service reporting module. And here's where we're kind of building on a few more of the personas that we have here. Here's analysis, and let's actually put something together. Here's let's deploy it to the dashboard for people that are not able to set their own up or build their own widgets. And then here's the last level. We heard the use case this morning in the keynote of when having executives that want to see a 3-ring binder of reports. Let's set them up to automatically email out or to print pixel perfect based on the gallery that we have there. So I know that was a quick tour. If anybody has any questions, let me know, but I hope that helps you understand how we sort of went through that process and then use that to identify how we can have a great experience for our users from day one. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I don't know if we have time for questions. Okay, we'll take 1 to 2 minutes for any questions on both Fran Connect solution and the Blueprint process in general.
I think we have one in the back. Sure, and I should clarify, so we started at about this time last year. We had a goal to have the prototype at the International Franchise Association convention in February, and then we wanted to be able to tell people that we were displaying our prototype in the booth that February, that we would be shipping within 4 to 6 weeks. So that was where part of the Blueprint approach came in, was after that conference to be able to launch that pretty quickly. We hit the first milestone in terms of having a prototype ready. We signed on literally just before midnight on New Year's Eve. Wow, we made these guys sweat a little bit. And then, so basically from the first week of January, it was about 5 weeks of prototyping in a quick start engagement. Then the Blueprint itself, I want to say, lasted 2 or 3 weeks. We would have been ready to launch our product as we had initially thought of the V1 release in April. We decided to expand the scope before we launched it and basically release our phases 1 and 2 together. We also had some organizational changes over the summer, and so we backburnered it, which is why we're launching now. But our own changes and fluctuations aside, it was about a 6-week period for each of those engagements to get to prototyping and then to a V1.
We'll take one more question and then release you all for lunch. And I can't see entirely in the light, so feel free to shout out. Okay, thank you all. And Delant, can you speak to where lunch can be found? Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Matt?